What's up, everybody? We're back to talk more about the 8-passenger situation, Ruby, Franke, and her co-defendant, Jodi Hildebrandt, because one of Jodi Hildebrandt's family members, who is also an alleged victim of Jodi Hildebrandt, has spoken out. You guys sent me a number of different podcasts and news clips. I mean, more than anything else I got sent over the last 2 days on Instagram and Twitter. And I've watched and listened to a couple of them, and I've picked the one that she did with the media specifically because she had a purpose for doing it this way. It fits in like the right time amount for a video like ours to keep it under an hour. We can go through it, listen to what she has to say, try to determine what, if anything, can be used at trial against Jodi Hildebrandt and or Ruby Franke. But in reality, it is a very horrifying interview and statement on what she went through. And it gives us a window into what Ruby Franke and other children have been through at the hands of Jodi Hildebrandt, at least by these allegations. So I think it is an eye-opening interview. I think it's important to look at things like this throughout the case. I also am going to talk a little bit about, at the end of the video, about this community and how we do things here on the Lawyer You Know's page and in the chat. We'll talk about sources. We'll talk about finding things. We'll talk about what our role is, my role is, our community's discussion, what the role is and what it's not. This is not a YouTube gossip channel. This is not a whodunit, try to figure out things like that. It is speaking about what's happening in the court system, legally, law enforcement, what the lawyers are going to do, what the evidence is going to be, what witnesses may be called. That is more of our role. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end if I remember. But in this video, we're going to watch this interview, and I want you to keep in mind, okay, because we know a lot about other bad acts evidence, 404B. We've talked about it in Murdoch and other cases, what can come in, what can't. And for those of you that are new here or don't know about other bad acts evidence, you cannot bring in other bad acts of a criminal defendant to show that they have the propensity or are more likely to commit similar acts. Meaning, if I punched a kid in 5th grade and now I am accused of domestic violence, they can't get into the fact that I punched a kid in 5th grade. It's way too remote, has nothing to do with this case. In this circumstance, is totally different motive, different actions. You can't just say because he did it once, he must do it every time somebody accuses him of it. And that makes sense, right? I forgot to say, hit the like button, subscribe to the page, all those things. But in this case, we're going to hear from this victim about other bad acts of Jodi Hildebrandt. So as we're listening, let's not think of if this evidence can be propensity, and if it says, oh, because she did that, she must have done this, but instead, any of the permitted uses of other bad acts, because they do come in a lot of cases. In Murdoch's case, the financial crimes came in as motive for the crimes he committed against his wife and son. So the other permitted uses besides motive are opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, absence of mistake, or lack of accident. Now, specifically, I think we should keep in mind motive. Is there a motive for her tying these kids up and duct taping them that this victim's going to explain? Opportunity. Is she the one that had the opportunity to commit these crimes? Has she had the opportunity to do it in the past? If she argues something like, oh, it couldn't have been me, I wasn't left alone with the kids, well, is that actually true? And you can bring in evidence to show she specifically has opportunities like this. Preparation and plan, maybe. But another interesting one is knowledge, absence of mistake, and lack of accident. So if she says something like, oh, I didn't know it was hurting them, or this is a specific way that I do my therapy, or, some of the other atrocities that we're going to hear in this interview, she's not going to be able to argue that this was an accident or this is a mistake. And if she does, then these other bad acts, I think, are a great argument for the state to bring in to show that that's not actually the case, and why it's purposeful manipulation based on these allegations, and which are very similar to the allegations she's been charged with, 6 felony counts of aggravated child abuse. It's also interesting to talk about the dynamic between Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt in this interview that maybe Ruby Franke's attorneys might use. What did she know What did she not know? Was she just advised by the church that this person is a great spiritual therapist and counselor for her children, and she left her in their care? And if so, I think there's still some child neglect issues, but maybe not the purposeful, with knowledge and intent, aggravated child abuse that she's been charged with. Could be a defense from Ruby Franke. And that's what we do on this channel. We try to think about how both lawyers and the judicial system will handle these cases and what they'll look like. So let's get into the interview now.
When was the last time you either saw, spoke to, or in a way heard from Jodi? Has it been a long time?
It's been a long time. I think it was a family member's wedding, like probably over a decade ago.
You were also under her care at one point, right?
So this is Jodi Hildebrandt's niece, I believe. And they're going to talk about how when she was under Jodi Hildebrandt's care, what that was like.
Yeah, I was left in her care when I was a teenager, for a little under a year.
Have you met Ruby before?
No, I've never met Ruby. This is the first time I've ever even heard of her. I have gone and watched at least some of her videos. They're very difficult to watch just for my own experience with that form of therapy. It's quite triggering, to be honest. So I've never met her, but the things that she is saying and regurgitating are very, very familiar to me. It's interesting to watch I understand this, but it's interesting to watch the world respond to her and kind of putting her at the forefront. And I understand that she's the mother of these children, and it makes sense. But the philosophies and the therapeutic modalities that she's using are Jodi's. And these are not new. These are not, this is a pattern that Jodi has been engaged with for at least 14 years.
So if they do try to get into habit, it's not a specific instance of, every time I get in the car, I put on my seatbelt, but maybe they'll get into her habit and reputation and what she's known for doing. Maybe Ruby Franke will even point the finger at Jodi Hildebrandt. Those things are on the table. They could do some kind of joint defense agreement. We know they were friends and maybe partners, business partners, but this witness, and I think a lot of people were surprised, like, why would her friend be charged with child abuse? And then we find out they were at her house. And now we're finding out these allegations that this is her system that she puts in place. This is the way she disciplines and teaches discipline. So, right here, the ringleader and the main culpable party, at least from this one witness's perspective, is Jodi Hildebrandt, not Ruby Franke, who's getting a lot more of the bad press because she is, in fact, a social media influencer-y type person, which is interesting. It's interesting in how today's day and age, how we look at things and condemn people based on their platform sometimes, when there is definitely wrongdoing on Ruby Franke's part, but is Jodi more to blame? And I think it's just stuff to think about that a jury might have to think about one day if this goes to trial.
I don't know if there are other people that she's used these on, but she's definitely taught. I know that she teaches parents to use these types of therapies, as she would call them. So yeah, it's been a really interesting experience watching everyone focus on Ruby, and I understand why, but this is Jodi. These are Jodi's words. These are Jodi's ideas. These are over decades old. So yeah.
Is that why you've called Jodi the mastermind behind all of this?
Yes. That doesn't excuse Ruby's involvement and her perpetuating these beliefs and these systems, but Ruby didn't come up with this. Ruby obviously supports it and has used these on her children, but this is coming from Jodi.
In short, can you describe what you mean? Like, which practices are you talking about, just to make sure we're clear, because I know there's a lot out there. So which ones are you talking about that you've seen, that you're hearing about pertaining to her children, that you're familiar with too?
Sure, yeah. So the things that I experienced while living with Jodi, I experienced being tied, I experienced being duct taped, I experienced being blindfolded, I experienced severe isolation, I experienced severe emotional, spiritual, and psychological abuse. I experienced
So just those, right? Isolation, kind of trapped, blindfolded, duct tape, tied with ropes, all falls directly in line with the allegations in this case and the probable cause affidavit that we read yesterday and the 911 call that we read yesterday or that we heard yesterday. Horrifying, heartbreaking details that are corroborated now by an adult. And we got to realize in these processes, so many of them are kids, and it's so much harder for them to articulate and explain and understand what's going on and how this is bad. But to have an adult now corroborate them is going to be a big piece for this investigation, for public perception, that, discrediting kids is something that happens in a lot of these cases, but her voice coming out now, and maybe there will be more, is going to make a difference.
The being told I shouldn't be around other people, being told that I was dangerous to be around. People were afraid of me to the point where I was afraid of myself. I was physically, I was forced to sleep outside in the snow. I was, like I said, isolated for up to 12 hours a day. If someone spoke to me directly, if I wasn't wearing duct tape on my mouth, I had to just stare at them and not respond, because she also had systems of people that would report back to her if I broke any of these rules. And her whole thing, which is deeply, darkly ironic, is that everything stems from shame and how horrible shame is, and that all of the reason, like all of mental illness, all tics, so like OCDs, addiction, everything stems from shame.
And this also just makes me think back in the day and how the laws have developed over time. People in power, priests, pastors, therapists, counselors, lawyers, when they use that position of power to force this kind of abuse, there are enhanced penalties, and there should be. And they are looked at in a certain way because they know, especially children or vulnerable people, get in these situations. They are so much more easily manipulated and abused than somebody that is your equal or is stronger or above you, positionally. And, when we talk about victims in these cases, these are sorry, I didn't mean to pause it as she was blinking like that. It looked weird. These are the people that lawyers and law enforcement are supposed to help, the people that literally cannot help themselves. It reminds me of A Few Good Men, where he says, the one Marine that was, the follower of the leader was like, what's happening? Why didn't we do this? And the leader's like, because we didn't stand up for Santiago when he couldn't stand up for himself. And that's what we are supposed to do as Marines. And, people, lawyers, law enforcement, military, whatever it is, that is what we're called to do. And you're hearing that the ball still gets dropped today as we've progressed so long from some of the horror stories from, history.
Horrifying, because she is the greatest perpetuator of shame. She also, and this is like a very deep connection and why I chose to come forward to the media rather than just staying with the podcast. She accused me of being a sex addict. She accused me of being addicted to masturbation, to the point where I wasn't allowed to, I mentioned this on the podcast, to the point where I wasn't allowed to use tampons. I never was allowed privacy unless I was isolated. So that included the bathroom. I was never allowed to have the door closed because she was convinced that I was just constantly masturbating. She was convinced that I was addicted to porn. I had never seen porn at that point in my life. I didn't even know that people with my anatomy could masturbate. Like I had no idea any of this stuff, but I just believed her.
And I will say, in certain sheltered cultures, that is true. Like, I mean, it may seem unbelievable to people, but that is true. To not even realize how it works with your anatomy as a female, to understand, what some of this stuff is when you live in certain bubbles. That is not, and I know there are going to be people in the comments about, her tattoos or piercings or whatever, like, yeah, right, whatever. People have been used by how they look to be discredited so many times in the past, and it has just proven to be false. There is no correlation with that. And now there is correlation with credibility in the past and credibility in the future. And she's going to talk about that some. And if you're a proven liar in the past, like Alec Murdoch, for example, then it's going to be harder for you to be credible in the future. Now, whether or not that's legitimate or not is very different than how a person looks. And I will just say, regardless of what she looks like, regardless of, tattoos or whatever, what she is saying is a legitimate reality for people that grow up in certain cultures. And to not understand what that is and then be told you're addicted to it or that's all you do, imagine what that does to a young person's mind. Like, that's your first exposure and experience to any of that stuff. There's going to be no healthy way to learn and think about any of that and what to do with it, right, wrong, whatever. Just everything is warped. And that's how you really control people. And that's how you have a long-standing, systematic, abusive position like this, is if you're able to control people by using things that they think are good and pure and right, like religion, for example, and twisting it and just vilifying it and weaponizing it. That's the problem with starting out with something that can be good and you can turn it really, really bad. So I just wanted to come out and support the fact that this stuff does happen. People do think this. There is an ignorance, I mean, a blissful ignorance to certain things, and some of the horrors in the world that people don't learn about in certain bubbles. But there's also certain things you don't understand that other cultures think, yeah, right. As a teenager, you have to know what that is. So just wanted to point that out. And for anybody that's saying anything about how she looks, like, that's not, again, not how we do things here, not how we do things in court. There are going to be people on the jury that may look at her and think a certain thing, but usually law enforcement, lawyers, and judges are not going to do that. And I feel like she seems like a very credible witness to me personally with these specific firsthand knowledge and reported events, not secondhand. Nobody told her this happened to somebody. She is saying this happened to her. It is her firsthand experience and knowledge.
Because she used religion and God as a mode of control, and a mode to manipulate. And so I just believed all of these things. So her ability to convince you of these neuroticisms and these behaviors is, and I was a teenager. And so a child in that position of being told this over and over and over and over again, which I'm certain he was, stood no chance. She also, because of what the abuse and torturing that was going on, and the belief that she had that I was doing something more. So her rationale to the severity of these punishments and this physical and emotional abuse was, she wanted to make my life, and this is like her quote, like this is what she would tell me all of the time. She wanted to make my life so uncomfortable that it would force the sin out, that it would force me to confess. So things continuously got worse and worse and progressively more and more intense as a way to get me to confess, because she believed that if I had confessed everything, if all of my sins were out and in the open, that I would be getting better. And I was declining like very fast, exponentially. And
if you think about this, it's not the only place this is used. It's like torture to get information has been used and still used now in literal warfare. And it's like, is that really the way? It's gone away in the legal system, because that is not the way to get credible confessions or statements made by anybody. Everybody knows that.
So she just kept ramping it up. And so to hear Ruby tell the world that her child is a sex addict, a predator, and has been addicted to porn since he was 3 years old, it just echoes exactly the things that she was telling me. And
so that was a really important part, that some context to just connect the dots. So we talked about how Ruby said something in the custody hearing, I think, about her son having these issues. And now we're going to hear that this is a pattern of what Jodi does and what her disciples, for lack of a better term, do. And why do they do it? And she's going to talk about that and get into that now. And that's a really interesting point, because I pointed out yesterday that maybe this is something they're going to try to use as a defense, that these kids deserved it. And can you really believe anything they say if they're going around doing things like this? We had to keep them trapped so that they weren't hurting other kids. So keep that in mind now as she goes through what their pattern is, how they do things, how they protect themselves, even in the legal process today.
Telling everyone around me. And I know that I think if I don't know if I got this right, but I'm pretty sure that she's saying that he even confessed to it. Well, I also confessed to things that I didn't do as a way of trying to get the abuse to stop. Because when she's like drilling it into you both psychologically and physically that there's more, and it will stop once you tell her, because that's what she would tell you. Like in the middle of the abuse, she'd be like, I'll stop as soon as you tell me. As soon as you tell me what's going on, like what you did. Oh, she was also convinced that I had abortions. She was convinced she made me do 12-step because she was convinced I was an addict, like a drug addict as well. I'd never done drugs. I'd never had sex. Again, I didn't know that masturbation was even possible. I had no idea what these things were. So I just started making things up as a way, as like trying to get this to stop, because I had no one there to help me and to save me. And I think I even said that on the podcast that I was making things up. And when I spoke to the detective,
again, and we've even seen some of this, not to the level here that we're talking about, but even in law enforcement with some kind of coerced or forced confessions and using isolation and the amount of time that they wait and giving you food or water or not giving you food or water to get these types of confessions. And we know in the past, the data has shown people make false confessions. So none of this is so out of line to be unbelievable to her. Now, was she a perfect kid? Probably not. Was Frankie's son a perfect kid? Probably not. But that's very different than publicly discrediting them and shaming them. And again, planting seeds of doubt for anything they were to say. So if they are the witness against you and you can convince law enforcement or the state attorney or maybe one day a jury that they are not credible, they'll say whatever they need to save their butt. And here are examples of what they did. Here's written confessions of them lying about things in the past. We even saw this kind of used against R. Kelly, if you want to connect it to that, where there were these handwritten letters that the victims were like, yeah, he forced us to write that or else he would have done this, that, and the other. This horrifying stuff is used by abusers in today's day and age. We see it in the legal system all the time. Now, it still needs to be proven, right? At this point, these are all allegations. But as they stack up and the evidence builds against them, especially Jodi Hildebrandt, based on this witness, you start to see the full picture of what the state may be able to put together in a trial in this case.
Down in St. George days ago, I told her that as well. It's like and so even if he had confessed, it cannot be taken seriously because this child was being tortured. And I'm certain that she echoed those words of like, if you tell me, I will stop. So what is happening, it just echoes so close to home of what she did to me. And the repercussions, the emotional and physical repercussions of those actions, like the fact that she can, because the thing that's so sinister about this is that it can't be disproven. So even if like she goes to prison, his name is cleared, it will never be fully cleared because it cannot be disproven. So this is going to potentially.
We talk about false allegations all the time and what it does to a person's life. Imagine even worse when you're a kid, an adult is saying and doing this to you. I have had clients that have told me stuff like this where they don't even know if it's true or not themselves because an adult in a position that they trusted told them so many times it was true. They literally in their own mind, in reality, don't know if it was true or not. So she's right. And that's why it's just, it's tough to stick to these are the allegations alleged. We're going to, but it's tough when it's somebody who's speaking out that has firsthand experience with this. And I think should and will be a witness in this case to how Jodi Hildebrandt performed her therapy and counseling, and to discredit some of the specific allegations or discrediting remarks she's going to make towards her victims. I think that is how you can get into some of these other bad acts.
Follow him for the rest of his life. So even with those children being taken out of her care, she is still abusing them. And so with whatever is happening, whatever did happen, I can guarantee you it's not what she's saying.
Her business, Connections Classroom, is this the same approach she uses for all of her patients as well that are not family or not Ruby's kids, as far as you know?
I don't know the intricacies of what she promotes and what she teaches on Connections Classroom. If it's anything even close, then I'm certain that there's going to be parallels I'm certain, I know that she believes that.
And I think the Connections Classroom thing is something that Ruby Franke is a partner in. So again, maybe that's wrapping in how they do actually work together, and it's not just Jodi Hildebrandt.
All shame should be punished. And I know that like that. So like, I wouldn't be surprised. I really don't know. I've stayed away as much as possible from her and her world, to just heal and to try to salvage any life that I could possibly live, post living with her.
With that said, it sounds like this wasn't really a secret, though. Obviously, you knew about these teachings. Other people in her family, probably both families I've been hearing, knew about some of these practices or had heard of. Why do you think it took to 2023 for a child to escape, go to a neighbor's house, call 911, and now this is a thing? Like, why did it take this long?
I think it's a combination of quite a few things. One, the church supports her. She's been promoted by the church, and people trust the church. Members trust their bishops, they trust their stake presidents, and a lot of these people, most people that are going to therapy, if not all, are in a vulnerable position. And she is remarkably convincing.
And so here's what I'll say, and I don't remember specifically about what she says the rest of the interview, but trusting the church in a vulnerable position, that's true. And it always doesn't end up like this, right? But there are certain perpetrators that either get to certain positions or find themselves in certain positions to where they can further their defect and perpetration on vulnerable people. That doesn't mean that she is condemning or that the legal system or anybody is condemning the church as a whole or every therapist as a whole, in or out of the church. No, that's not what's happening here. This is about an individual person. And that's why these individual people need to be caught and punished so that they're taken out of their position of power to prey on the vulnerable.
She is also terrifying if you cross her, because she has and will systematically destroy your life. She destroys your reputation. She destroys any of your credibility. So even because there are definitely people that have been speaking out against her. I mean, she lost her license because of someone speaking out in 2012. Like, she's not just, everyone's not just been like, okay, yeah, for sure, fair game, free for all. People have been criticizing her. That's just that no one has listened. Because one, we have a culture of people not believing children and not trusting children. And
so let's take this all in turn, okay? So that to me indicates that there's going to be more people coming out. More people have been talking about her already over the past 10 years. Allegedly, she lost her license. I don't know. I didn't look that up. But if that's true, that's all stuff that might come out at her trial. Number one. Number two, a history of not believing children. That's true. But there are reasons for that, right? And while I think that children can be absolutely credible witnesses, and I think that if they're strong enough and able to get on the stand, I mean, we saw Ronnie O'Neal's son take the stand against his dad, and his dad cross-examined. It was heart-wrenching, but he did a great job just telling the truth and telling the facts. But there are situations even like this, okay? And I'm not condemning anybody. I hope you guys can stick with me and understand. Children that are put through traumatic events, the research, the science, the experts on both sides are clear that certain parts of those events may not be as credible as others, especially if I'll just take family law cases. In family law cases, it's so difficult when the children are involved because one parent will beat something into the child's brain and the other parent will beat something in the child's brain. Whether it's true or false, they'll say, he did this to you, he did this to you, he did this to you, right? So there are ways to actually discuss things with kids, and why we talk about, you don't hear on the stand, legally speaking, or in depositions, lawyers say things like, Mr. Jones, who is a 50-year-old professor, do you understand the difference between a truth and a lie? Do you understand the difference between right and wrong? Yet when child witnesses are on the stand, those are the types of questions we ask them. Because on either side, whether you're building up their credibility or whether you're showing that parts of their testimony may not be as credible as others, it's important to take that into account because, again, we don't want some mom convicted of something because some dad forced it into his child to say that the mom did this. We want credibility, but that's why statements like hers and other people and other corroborating evidence, like, frankly, it's almost like the kid doesn't even need to testify. got pictures of rope and duct tape, and he had to crawl out of a window, because that's not something, it's important, right? So were you punished or were you abused? They might not understand what those words even mean, right? But did you have to crawl out of a window to get out of the house? Yes. Were you allowed to leave? No, no, no. She told me I wasn't allowed to leave. Those are facts that are likely going to be more credible than deciphering motive behind adult action, to where just stating certain facts, we're going to know what happened. And obviously, if they're corroborated by the sores and the duct tape and the rope, I mean, it's just unbearable stuff, but certain parts are more credible than others. But as an overarching theme, to just discredit and not listen to kids is wrong. That cannot happen. And she's right. It happens far too often. And it happens with female victims too, which is why I shouldn't say female victims. It happens a lot of times with victims of domestic violence as well, because there are situations where there are false allegations, which is why I think false allegations do need to be punished, so that people know the risk they're taking when they come in if they are going to report a crime. Now, I understand the flip side of that argument. Well, if it's not proven, does that mean I get in trouble for reporting my truth? Well, I think that false allegations also need to be proven through the legal process as well. Not just, okay, we realize you made this allegation and we don't think there's enough evidence to prove it. Is very different than, we have now proved you lied based on text messages or videos or whatever. So again, that's kind of a whole tangent we could do a whole video on, but I think she's right that children have been discredited, and we need to listen to kids, at least to the facts of what they said happened and what they did, even if they don't understand the motive or everything else that may be going on in the mind of the adult.
And also, children trust their parents, and then the parents trust the church. So there's been, and Jodi, what she does that's so tricky is that she utilizes and uses whatever is available. So if you go to her with OCD, if you go to her with severe depression, she'll use that information as a way of control. Oh, you have OCD because you have deep-rooted shame. And those tics are happening because the shame has nowhere to go. And so it's coming out in this neuroticism. And then, or let's say like you told her that you lied, which is a normal human thing that we've all done. That doesn't make you a liar. Oh, well, you lied. You're a liar. Now everything you say is a lie, and you can't be.
And again, this would only be able to be used by somebody that has a position of power of authority, because every person on the planet has lied. Every single person. And that's why we have, again, the law is really an interesting, and I'm learning to love it more as we continue to talk through this stuff. But like, that's why we have bias. Everybody's lied. So to say that you've lied in the past that doesn't do anything. And we usually don't allow we don't allow that type of question. You've lied before, right? It's not an appropriate question in the law. But what is appropriate is, this is your wife and you love her and you guys make money on this business together, to show bias that if you were going to lie, maybe you'd lie for this person, right? So the jury can have that understanding, and then they can say, well, no, it still seems like it's credible, even knowing that background information. Because just saying somebody lied once and calling them a liar is pure manipulation.
Be trusted. And she also separates people. She keeps people so they can't talk and corroborate. Like, it is so vile and tricky and ingenious. Like, Jodi is she is a very unwell person. I don't know her exact diagnoses, but I know that she's been diagnosed with a plethora of things. And yeah, so it's devastating, because I went forward as well. I mean, I went to the police when I was 16. I tried to do what I could.
And what I'm hoping is there is a police report at least done, so that they can show contemporaneous reporting. And again, that could be another huge piece of evidence if she reports similar things that she's reporting in this interview, and similar to what the allegations are today. And law enforcement and the state attorney's office will be able to find that and get it if it exists.
No one believed me, because why would they? She destroyed my credibility. I was an angry teenager, and now I'm just you're just like an emotional, angry teenager that.
And even if they have Jodi's response saying, oh no, she lied about this, lied about that, addicted to this, addicted to that, which again is the same exact thing she might try to do in this case, those could all be very big pieces of evidence.
And she had told people that I destroyed my family's life, that I destroyed my dad's life, that every person I come in contact, I destroy. So she sets up the premise. And then when I come forward and try to tell people, like, this is what's happening, she can be like, oh, see, Jesse's trying to destroy my life, is what they do. it just all adds up. So she's so good at protecting those loopholes and discrediting people.
Is that why you think maybe other members of both families still won't speak out publicly about this right now and are staying quiet? Or do you think it's a fear thing or just want to stay out of it? Is there any thought process on that?
I can't speak to why people aren't. I know the culture of my family. I think that it's probably a number of things. Some people, I think it's just that they themselves have been harmed so much by her, and they want to stay. They just want to live their life and not be dragged into this. Other members, it could be fear. I can't say. All I can say, and again, the only reason why I'm coming forward, I was not planning on coming forward to the media other than just doing the podcast interview, is when I heard that Ruby accused her child of this, because and I just hope that this can give the public some context and some clarity of what is happening and why they should not believe her.
So 6 charges of—
What also is interesting and just needs to be pointed out is any good lawyer and prosecutor will be able to say, even if they're lying, even if the kid's lying about whatever, he's accused of in the neighborhood or with other kids, how did he get the ropes around his hands? How did he get the duct tape around his legs and hands? How did he get the sores? How did he malnutrition himself? So it's like there are things in this case that are absolutely corroborative, even without statements by the kids. So discrediting them only really goes so far, which I think should bring some comfort to people that might be worried about the defendants being able to discredit the main witnesses against them because they're kids.
Aggravated child abuse. That's what's on the table. I'm sure you're not a legal expert. I'm not either, but I've talked to a number of attorneys just kind of about this case, more about the hype of the case, because it's obviously gotten a ton of attention because of Ruby's profile, right? Because of the high profile aspect of the YouTube channel. And that's why I think it's interesting we're talking about Jodi, because Ruby's got, as you mentioned, is getting the spotlight in a weird way. And Jodi, as you mentioned, is behind a lot of the tactics. Do you feel like 6 felony charges, I mean, in your mind, is that enough punishment for what is alleged against them?
I mean, I don't think that it's the full scope. I mean, including my own child abuse that I experienced. I mean, I want justice and I want fair justice. So I want everything that she has done, that both of them have done, to be held accountable. Whether that be 6, 12, 18, however many, I just want to see that she is held accountable for the things that she has done. But I personally believe that is not covering everything that she's done. And I can say that because I know that she's not being held accountable for what she did to me. In the legal system, I mean.
How closely?
And again, I think that's totally understandable, but I do think that we have to think at least it's happening now, right? At least she's not just going to continue to be a predator. And the fact that it is a second-degree felony child abuse and not the misdemeanor that it could be because it's intentionally inflicted and with knowledge, like we talked about, versus negligence and criminal negligence, she's looking at up to 15 years in prison per second-degree felony. So potentially her entire life if the book is thrown at her, either one of them or both of them.
Are you following this? Are you looking every day to see if there's something new that's put out? I mean, where is your mindset at with the case, so to speak?
Yeah, I'm not following it every single day. I'm trying to navigate just my own emotional safety in all of this. I'm trying to stay up to date. I have people that have sent me things that feel a little bit more safe in being more aware of what's going on. And so like when something big does come out, like with Ruby's accusations, I had someone sent that to me. And I was sitting in the parking lot of Lowe's and I started having a panic attack because it was just so directly similar. I mean, the exact thing. This is exactly what she does. This is what Jodi does. And so now, because she's painted him as this thing, regardless of what comes out, like he's no longer, I mean, I think hopefully the public can see through this and the judge can see through this. But that's the goal, is so that anything that he says is now no longer credible.
What do you think the public will ultimately take away from these two as it pertains to the court proceedings and such.
I mean, I just hope that Jodi is not sidelined in this, because she is so connected to what is happening. And yes, Ruby needs to be held accountable because she made those choices. She's just as guilty. But Jodi's been doing this for much longer and has patterns and history in this. So I just really hope that, yes, Ruby is the focus because of her high profile and because they're her children, but those children were, as far as I'm aware, I hope I got this right, were in Jodi's care. Like, this isn't, I just so hope that even though Ruby's the focus, I just hope that Jodi is not, that she's not able to slink away and just kind of fade into the background, because she's the foundation.
All right. I mean, there's so much there. And I definitely think there are things that she is going to be able to testify about in this trial that show a pattern, that show habit, that show what her intentions were, knowledge, absence of mistake, motive. I mean, all sorts of things. I think that she will be able to testify, maybe not to every single detail, but I do think that she will be able to testify at this trial, and she can be a very key witness. And maybe that old police report that she and maybe others over the last, I think she said 14 years, could potentially become part of this trial. So real quick, what are we about on this channel? What are we not about? We are about talking about the legal process. Like I said, we are about breaking down, and we can talk about credibility of witnesses. If you think she's telling the truth, if you don't think she's telling the truth and why, that's fine. If you think she's, bitter and has a bone to pick with Jodi, that's fine. We can talk about that because that's things a juror may discuss. But what we don't do is say, oh, I hate this person, or we can't even listen to it because they're on Chris Cuomo's show or on, CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, whatever it may be. Just because the host of something is talking to a potential witness doesn't mean we're not going to talk about what the potential witness said. Just because a document was posted on somebody's website that you don't like doesn't mean that it's not a legitimate legal document that could add context to the case. We try to look at all legal documents. We don't talk about, just random people giving their opinions on whether or not they like somebody is not really part of the case legally. So I think we have to keep that in mind when we talk about this case, when we talk about this stuff. That's why I talk about legal stuff. I love sports. I would love to talk about sports one day. I would love to do a sports podcast or sports YouTube channel one day. But the reason I started doing legal stuff instead of sports is because this is what I know. This is what I understand. And this is what I like discussing and what I like discussing with you all. This is what I have experience doing. This is things I can shed light on and add value to these conversations on. I have no clue. I don't follow any other person's reporting on any other case. Not mainstream media, not true crime, not anybody. Am I just listening to everything that they're putting out, understanding their views on everything, which is why I always say this channel is my perspective, my thoughts, my views, my filter, my opinions, not anybody else's. And I don't want you to apply me to anybody else. Regardless, if I go on their show, that doesn't mean they agree with everything that I say. If they come on here, it doesn't mean I agree with everything they say. And I think that's the only way we can have this open dialogue. So for people to be so condemning about certain things or certain posts or whatever it may be, I think you're missing the point a little bit. And I think if you only listen to people that agree with you on everything, you may miss out on some educational opportunities. And that's what we like to provide here. And that's why I like people that disagree with me. Now, if you tell me there's no way this is abuse, or this has to be abuse based on this definition, or, oh, look at this, they admitted abuse, this is going to be used against them. Great. Let's talk about that. Additionally, I heard some people saying, oh, and he loves Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke. He thinks they should get bail. It's like the fact that I think they should get bail has nothing to do with how I feel about them, has nothing to do with whether or not I think they committed these crimes. I'm purely just applying the facts that I know in this case so far, which is not everything, to what the bail standards are and the factors that judges weigh for bail. I don't think they're going to get released on their own recognizance with no bail. I think there should be a high bail with a lot of restrictions. They could be held with no bail. It's happened before in child abuse cases. It's not an impossibility. but I'm just applying the facts to the law and giving my analysis. That's what this channel is about. And if you disagree and think they shouldn't get bail, that's fine. Let me know why. Why do you think they shouldn't get bail based on the factors? But don't say I want them to get bail because I like them. I literally have no clue there. I never watched it. I still have not watched an 8 Passengers episode or whatever they are. So let's try to keep it focused. Let's try to keep it right in the chat and how we interact, because I like interacting. I don't want to stop reading comments. I don't want to stop responding to questions and just sit here and talk the whole time on every video. I know that's what I did this video because it's pre-recorded. So let's keep an open, respectful dialogue that's educational, and then we can, try to work through some of the world's most difficult problems and cases that we look at and talk about together. So that's the end of my TED Talk. But I always appreciate you being here. I always appreciate you being in the comments. Hit the like button on the way out. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who might be interested here on YouTube. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, at Lawyer You Know. But on Instagram, we are still at Tragos Law. So look us up on there. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us lawyeryouKnow@gmail.com. Of course, all of these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You